Hi, and welcome to our Patreon exclusive discussion, How to Leave America. Hopefully, this is interesting for people, even if you haven't decided you want to leave America, but this is going in tandem with the video released today. Should you leave the United States? That's a question you have to answer for yourself, and that's something that I discuss at length in that video, so check that out. But if you have made the decision that you'd like to leave, or you're on the fence, you want more information, I'm going to share with you all the stuff that I've learned over the last 2 years of obsessively researching this. But I'm going to break it down into a video series because it's just so much, and I want this to be digestible for people. So we're going to start step by step. Okay, we'll go from there, and then also you can leave your questions, and so I can respond to those in future videos. Is the goal. So you've decided you'd like to leave the United States. How do you leave? Well, first, you have to figure out where the heck you want to go. Because there's a lot of logistics and details that we can get into, but first and foremost, you have to pick some place you actually want to relocate to, and you need to actually want to go to there. It's one thing to want to escape, and I think that's an important motivator if you have motivations to leave, but you need to have something drawing you there as well. And so picking the right place is important. And I don't know if that's necessarily where people always start. I think a lot of people start way too into the weeds. Like, where will I work? How will I make money? How am I going to make this financially work? Those are valid questions that we will discuss. But before you take a deep dive into finding employment, you're overlooking some basics. Just because you could find a job in a city doesn't mean that you should move to that city if it's not the right place for you, you know? Because leaving the US doesn't just guarantee peace and happiness. I think it's worth thinking hard about where you want to be truly day-to-day living life. I think the thing that struck me the most when I lived abroad, when I was studying abroad in South America, was that it was this big adventure for me, and then I got there and I was like, bored once in a while, and I was like, oh, that's right, because anyone anywhere is just kind of living their lives, you know? It's not just sunshine and rainbows everywhere. So let's start with a region. How do you pick first you got to just pick the region, and pick a region where you'll actually be comfortable. I know weather doesn't, maybe not at the top of the list, but it is a huge impact on your quality of life. So it may seem simple, but it should be like a huge consideration. If you would be absolutely miserable in a place that's cold and rainy, or in a place that's constantly hot, then it doesn't matter what their visa processes are, what their healthcare system's like. If every day you're just generally uncomfortable, that's not the place for you. You should look elsewhere. Believe me, it will weigh on you. I lived in Cusco at 12,000 feet for 4 months, and I've never been more depressed because I was so physically uncomfortable living at that elevation, and I couldn't even like go for a run to get some endorphins because I was out of breath just walking. And I run very warm. I grew up in the tundra of Minnesota, so even though a place that is perpetually sunny and warm sounds nice in theory, like a permanent vacation, it's not going to be very comfortable for me. I get like kind of mad when I'm hot. I think I would be miserable. But if you grew up in a warm and sunny place, then like the gray, rainy doldrums of Scotland, as romantic as that sounds, might actually make you incredibly depressed. So I like to go to, I just Google like average weather in whatever area I'm looking for to try to see kind of month to month how hot it is and the humidity specifically and how much it rains. Other things to consider when picking a region. How far is it from where you currently live or have been living? Like Oceania, is that how you say that? I don't know that I've ever said that out loud. Australia, New Zealand, seems really cool. It looks cool. But if you live on the East Coast of the United States, that's like a multi-day journey to get there. And if you have any plans on like being able to come back and visit family, that could really hinder it because it's also probably not a cheap flight either. What's the climate viability of the region that you're looking at? This might be a little prepper of me, but if you're planning a long-term move, I think it's valid and important to think about the types of extreme weather that the region gets. For some reason, there's a lot of cities in the US that are getting hotter and hotter, but are also seeing a lot of immigration to them because people are looking, not even immigration outside of the US, but like migration within the US to like Scottsdale. Like that place is not going to be livable in 20 years, but I think there's shorter term considerations that people are making, but I think it's worth thinking about. Also, like, are you okay with the increasingly dramatic hurricanes happening in the Caribbean if you want to move to the Dominican Republic? You know, like these are things you got to be thinking about. When I was looking, I was thinking like, wow, it would be so amazing to move, you know, south. It'd be warm all the time. And then I was looking at just like the projected heat in certain areas and just how hot it's going to get and continue to get. I don't want to live in that. Italy is starting to get increasingly hot, heat waves killing people. You know, it's just something to think about. Increasing weather issues. Is it on the coast? Is that going to be underwater soon? I was attracted to Northern Europe, specifically Amsterdam and the Netherlands, because if you didn't know this, Amsterdam was reclaimed from the sea. A lot of northern Netherlands was reclaimed from the sea because they know how to build dams and manipulate water to somehow keep it above the ocean, even though a lot of the Netherlands is below sea level. So like it being below sea level is scary, but I felt better knowing that like they have learned to navigate rising sea levels for centuries at this point. So it's an important thing to think about. Will you be comfortable there? And what will it be like 20, 40 years from now, climate-wise? And noticing that I'm not mentioning money yet. Again, employment and the cost of living is a huge and important consideration. And I'm not saying we're going to overlook that, but I think people write off like all of Europe as too expensive, when that's not always the case if you know where to look. So don't let that hinder you now at our beginning stages. We're dreaming, we're ideating, we're thinking about possibilities here. So I think, especially in the survey that I took, a lot of the responses and a lot of times when I've talked to people, they write off the possibility of them ever relocating on money alone. And it isn't cheap, but I don't think it's as inaccessible as people think it is. So I don't even want to touch money yet because I want you to dream big, okay? And really get your creative juices flowing before deciding that it's just never going to work out for you. So again, when going through this process, I personally landed on Northern Europe. It has the cool, temperate climate that my hot, sweaty body needs. Okay, it's where my ancestors are from. I have heritage in Luxembourg and other parts of northwestern Europe. So I'm literally going back to where I came from. And most of the countries have strong environmental and climate solutions. And in terms of like going back to where I came from, that was a big consideration as well for me. Just thinking about, and we can talk about this with like a city to city discussion about gentrification and stuff, but I think there are valid arguments to be made about like a bunch of white people immigrating to Costa Rica. I think that there have been some negative consequences on local populations, and just being mindful of how your presence might affect the country or region that you want to move to, I think is important. That doesn't mean that Europe is the only place you can go if you're white. And I don't think there's one blanket answer to that, but I think it's worth being sensitive to. Okay, so we've thought about climate. We've thought about what feels right. We've thought about culture. Like, are you going back to like your family roots? Is this a new culture that you would need to assimilate to, that you've never, like if you want to move to Thailand and you've never been to any country in Asia ever and you have no concept of what the culture is like? Something to think about. If you're up for that and you want that, amazing, but it's something to think about. Once you pick a region, then you have to find a country. When narrowing down to pick a country, this is when we start to get into the nitty-gritty details. First and foremost, the visa situation. And I think I'm going to spend the rest of this little episode just on the visa situation, because I think picking a region, it's not fucking rocket science, all right? We got some considerations. We're thinking about it. And you could be toying with a couple different regions and looking into it, even in the early stages. But let's talk visas, because there's a lot of them, and it varies from country to country, obviously. First and foremost, though, we need to talk about visas because it's not worth going down the rabbit hole of learning about a country if it turns out you couldn't even get in long term to begin with. And here are the visa processes that I'm familiar with, and it's a good place to start to Google the name of the country you are looking at, plus the name of one of these visas that I'm about to list, whichever one applies to you, and then see what the process is like. Every country has a government website. Most of them are translatable into English that explains the visas to you. Not necessarily in enough detail that you'll be ready to just jump in like that. Like, it's mostly pretty complicated, but it'll at least break it down to see whether or not it even applies to your situation. So first on the list, business or retirement visas, also called golden visas. This is for, like, if you're rich, if you got $500,000 to $1 million to spare, you probably don't even need me because many countries have visas that allow you to buy your way in, either by acquiring property, like spending at least $500,000 on some property or other investments, or starting or moving a large company there where you're going to generate or affect the economy in a large way. And there are entire companies that you can hire that will hold your hand through the entire process. And if you have the money to get one of these, you likely have the money to hire one of those companies. But if you are retirement age and you have cash to spare, retirement visas are a very popular thing throughout Europe and Latin America, probably Asia too, but I have less knowledge of Asia because I mainly looked into Europe and Latin America. But yeah, it's and in some countries, especially in Latin America, you don't need as much money. In certain countries, like if you want to buy your way into a country in Europe, like Portugal, is like $500,000 to $1 million. But other countries in South America, it's less. That being said, if you have a small business, that could be a gateway in. For example, I know in the Netherlands, they have a visa program where if you want to start a business, and it doesn't have to be a huge business, you need like $4,000 in the bank, I think, and you want to start an LLC and do business in the Netherlands, you can get a visa that way. It's not a like retirement visa, it's a LLC visa. So I would Google Netherlands small business visa if you're interested in that, and that applies to you if you're able to conduct your business in the Netherlands. I will say I did speak to a tax advisor briefly just to kind of discuss my options, looking at, like, because I own a small business, how would I move that to the Netherlands specifically? And for tax purposes, if you already have a small business and moving to the Netherlands means that most of that business will be conducted out of the Netherlands because you physically are there. And by that, I mean the money is like circulating through the Netherlands, which it would if you are in the Netherlands and you're the one earning the money. Even if you have a bank account in the United States, you're physically in the Netherlands, so they're considering that Netherlands income. It actually behooves you to move your business to the Netherlands so that you don't have to worry about the taxes here in the United States. And there are ways where like you can make sure, if you work with a tax professional, that you're not getting double taxed. So the money that you make in the United States would be taxed by the US. The money you make in the Netherlands would be taxed there, but they wouldn't be double taxed. There are ways to do that. Highly recommend working with a professional on that, but it is possible, and it is possible to get that visa if you want to move your LLC over there. And if you have an LLC and want to move to the Netherlands, it makes more sense likely to move your LLC over there. Okay? So that's business. Another option, work or school visas. If you can find a company that will hire you and sponsor you, or you decide you want to pursue education in that country, businesses and schools typically have pretty hands-on guides and processes and people and whole departments for obtaining the proper visa. And on the topic of work, it is possible to find a job in another country. Sometimes they even have English-speaking positions if that's the only language you speak. I would highly suggest checking out Reddit forums. They're a great place to start. I would just Google English jobs plus the country you're interested in plus the word Reddit, or how to find expat work plus the country plus Reddit. Those are the search terms I would literally put into Google. And pretty universally, there are some generally in-demand jobs that I think a lot of countries are looking for. Nursing. A lot of countries need nurses. And tech jobs. I would also Google like most in-demand job wherever it is that you're looking. On another note, there are many visas that are for highly skilled workers in very specific industries, and those industries vary depending on the country. So this is why it's important to look into the visas of a country that you're considering, because it can depend greatly. But a lot of times, tech. A lot of times, if you have a tech background, you can get in. That being said, if you do not currently have a tech background and you're like, I want to get out of the United States, I'm willing to do whatever it takes, and I just am so excited at the idea of leaving, I just don't know how to do it, but I'm willing to put in the work, I think it would be worth considering doing some training to learn the tech and like set up a game plan. I know this is a lot, but like, this is what I'm saying when people say like, oh, I couldn't find a job, it's too expensive, I couldn't do it, and they just write it off and can't do it. I think that's small-minded thinking, okay? I'm a big picture dreamer. You can do anything you put your mind to within reason when it comes to living abroad. Yes, it'll take hard work. However, a lot of tech you can learn from like an online course. You can take a coding course, you can take an AI course, you can take a front-end development, a back-end development, Python, whatever. There's tons and tons. Data analytics is a big one. There's tons and tons of training you can do online, and a lot of those professions, because there's such a demand, they don't need you to have necessarily a college degree in the topic. They just need you to show that you actually know what you're doing. And that might mean that you finish a program and then you get a job here in the United States and you get some work on your resume, and then you start applying for jobs in the country where you want to work. Or you do the training and then find a job at a company that's a large multinational company with the hope that you'd be able to work for them and then transfer to a new country. That being said, don't expect US level wages pretty much anywhere, even in Europe. In Europe, they're paid less. They pay more taxes as well, both. But they also need less because they're not existing within the hellish hellscape that we live in here in the United States, and they actually have services to support them, so they're not like stress buying things. Just me? No? So even if you find a job at a large company in the US that has international locations, if you relocate to one of their international locations, they may lower your salary based on your new location. So that is something to take into consideration. How much do you need to make to live? And that's also a consideration when looking at large cities, especially in Europe, and picking which country you want to live in. That being said, again, yes, it is expensive to live in Europe. I personally found the complaints to be a little overblown. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's hard to find a job. Yes, it's hard to find housing. It's not impossible, though. You just got to have a little grit, a little gumption, a little elbow grease. You can figure it out. I believe in you. If this is what you really want to do, you can figure it out. That's your pep talk. And then for school, it's a hell of a lot easier, and schools in Europe are way the fuck cheaper than in the United States, even if you're paying out of country US tuition. So highly recommend looking into schools. And a lot of countries, if you go to school and you get an education visa, they come with like an extended education visa. So after you graduate, you then have a year or two to work. You have a visa where you can work. And then hopefully by that point, you've established yourself where you can get a job at a company that will sponsor you, and or you've been there long enough to apply for permanent residency. A lot of countries have permanent residency that kicks in around 5 or 7 years. So if you've been living there legally for 5 years, you can apply to be a permanent resident, which then comes with work and living privileges. That is very country specific. So you'll want to look into, I think the things that I would always Google when I was looking into countries was the different visa options, and then length to, like, the process for becoming a citizen, length to permanent residence, length to citizenship. How long do I have to stay there? Because some countries it's not even possible. There's no way for you to, there's nothing that you could do to stay long enough to get that citizenship. But like in Portugal, 5 years, I think. there's a lot of countries in Europe where it's 5 or 7 years. But then there are countries where, like in the Netherlands, the only way you can get citizenship is if you're willing to renounce all your other citizenships. So if you're looking to get citizenship at some point to a country, if Google to make sure that that country allows dual citizenship, because if not, giving up American citizenship, not recommended. Not recommended for pretty much anyone. It costs money. I do believe you have to pay to rescind, like pay the US government to get rid of your citizenship. And I think you might still have to pay taxes. Like I think they really keep their claws in you. So as much as you're able to find a country where dual citizenship is permitted, so in the Netherlands it's not, but in Portugal it is. Those are the two countries that I looked this deeply into. So that's the information I have. The UK, really hard. So that's Ireland. Well, yeah, that's Ireland, Scotland, England. It's really hard to get in unless you have a highly skilled, a skill that they are looking to hire, or you go through school or a company. That brings us to our next topic, nomad visas. Nomad visas take a number of different forms. They can be very short term. So it's like you can stay here for 90 days and then you gotta get the heck out. Some of them are a little longer where you can stay for a year. Most of them are not long enough for you to then turn it into permanent residency. So if you are looking for a long-term solution where you want to settle in one specific space, usually a nomad visa isn't going to do it. Portugal, and I don't know how long this is going to be, but Portugal, one of the reasons why I think so many people are moving to Lisbon is because they have a very liberal nomad visa or work visa requirement. Basically, if you can show that you've got like $10,000 to $15,000 in the bank, which is a lot of money, I know, but like compared to having to invest 500 grand or something, you know, it's not as much. If you can show that you have a chunk of money in the bank and you can support yourself, and that support yourself because the cost of living in Portugal is lower and the incomes in Portugal are lower. I'm pretty sure it's 12,000 euros that you have to show, like, I have this, I'm making this, I can support myself. As long as you can show that, it could be from anywhere, you can live and work there for as long as you want. And then after 5 or 7 years, because I can't remember which, you can then apply for permanent residency. I think it's 5 years permanent residency and 7 years to citizenship. That's why Lisbon, or Portugal generally, has such a draw. Plus, Lisbon's fucking gorgeous. I loved Lisbon. I would move there if it weren't for, it's warm all the time and I'm sweaty. And then also my partner needs a job and he doesn't have his own LLC. He's not like he doesn't have a nomadic job. And the wages in Portugal, if you were to get a Portuguese job, are very low. So that's a consideration as well. If you want to get a job locally, a lot of time the wages, like I said, are very low in Portugal especially. But they do have a good nomad visa. But also, if you are looking to just get the fuck out and you want to move to Europe and you're willing to hop around and you want to have some adventure, there's a lot of countries that have year-long nomad visas where you show up and you say, I'm here to be a nomad, and you have to fill out some paperwork, and then they let you stay for a year, and then you can move on to the next one. And so it's less nomadic than if you had to leave every 30 to 90 days, depending on the tourist visas that you get automatically upon entry. Those are the main visas. And then the next question or possibility is getting citizenship to these countries, not by living there long term, but by descent, by inheritance. Do you have family members who came to the United States at some point, generally within the 1800s or early 1900s, from Europe or elsewhere? Or do you have citizenship? There's a lot of countries in Latin America where if you have citizenship there, you get, like, I know Chile has an agreement with Spain where you get special citizenship or visa privileges to Spain, probably as an apology for like colonization and stuff. But there's a lot of loopholes when it comes to your inheritance, your just like where you came from. For me, that worked out quite fortuitously because I ended up getting dual citizenship in Luxembourg, of all places. I went to, oh, which was it? MyHeritage. Yeah, MyHeritage. I got an inheritance, like they do a DNA test. I figured out where my family was from. And then I was talking to my mom and her sister, and they were saying that their cousins got citizenship in Luxembourg. And, that's one generation removed from me. So I wasn't sure if that was a possibility for me. Actually, initially, I'd written it off as not. I was like, well, that's too bad. That's really sad that I missed the boat on that. But then when they were talking, I was like, oh, God, I wonder. I mean, that's so close to me. I wonder if I could figure out how to do it. So I Googled it, and then Lux Citizenship popped up, not sponsored, LUX Citizenship. They are a company that helps people get their citizenship because Luxembourg has a pretty liberal citizenship rule, in my opinion. And so I filled it out, and basically, at least in Luxembourg, if you have a parent or grandparent who was a citizen, then you can get citizenship. I don't have a parent or grandparent, but my mother does. My mother's grandmother, follow me, my mother's grandmother was the daughter of a man who was born in Luxembourg. So he was born in Luxembourg, came over when he was 3 in 1860, and gave birth to my mother's grandmother. And even though my mother's grandmother, I don't think she ever set foot in Luxembourg, I don't know. She was not born in Luxembourg, but because her parent was Luxembourgish, she technically had Luxembourg citizenship, though she never officially was conferred it. She technically had it. And so they have this really liberal policy where you can posthumously confirm that your ancestor had citizenship. And then once you do that, you can then apply for citizenship. So I paid for my mother to do this because I was like, Mom, will you please do this? Because then I can get citizenship. So, and Lux Citizenship handled all this paperwork. We just got the vital records, like birth certificates and stuff, and they did the rest. But we got the piece of paper that confirmed that my mother's grandmother was a citizen of Luxembourg, even though she never claimed it. And that my mother is her granddaughter, and therefore she is a citizenship. She is a citizen. Then my mother flew to Luxembourg, filled out the paperwork, and then 4 months later got her official document saying she was a citizen. And now, because again, remember the policy is that if your parent or grandparent is a citizen, then you can get citizenship. My mother is now officially a citizen of Luxembourg, so then I was able to go through the process, submit the paperwork, fly to Luxembourg, show up, sign some things, and now I am a citizen. All that to say, look into your heritage. Ask your mom or your grandma or your cousins or something if they know anything. I feel like in most families, there's like one kooky third cousin who's obsessed with family trees. I have a Facebook page with like 10,000 people on it. That's like all my third, fourth, fifth, eighth, 10th removed cousins because I have one distant cousin who's obsessed with it. And it's actually fun. It's fun because there's like a lot of old photos. But someone in there has got to know something. I know there's different, in Ireland, if you have a grandparent, I think you might qualify. Poland, I know there's some inheritance you can get. Germany, Italy, Croatia. So I would look into it. I don't know about Latin America because I didn't look into it because I'm white as snow, but I'm sure other countries have that as well. So it's something worth looking into, and don't write it off until you've exhausted all avenues and spoken to everyone that you can, or found something official from the government that's like, makes it certain that you cannot get it. Because now that I have Luxembourgish citizenship, that's EU citizenship. I can live and work anywhere in the EU. So I could still pick up and go live in the EU whenever I want to, it's a great, even though I've decided I'm going to stay for now, it's a great escape hatch. I could decide 40 years from now that I want to retire in Europe. It opens up so many possibilities. And now that my mom has it, that means that my sisters can have citizenship and their children can have citizenship. So I like to think that I personally opened the doors, not only for myself, but for my sisters and for their children. And they could, if you have an EU citizenship, going to university in the EU is so fucking cheap. You can go for like $5,000 a year. So I'm hoping that at least one of them takes advantage of that and looks into it. But it's a really exciting opportunity. So I would highly suggest looking into that as well. It's a lot of Googling. It's a lot of looking around, figuring things out. But It's absolutely possible. So, to recap, step one, figure out the region you want to live in. Where are you going to be comfortable? Where are you going to have longevity? Step two, you got to find a country. The first thing you should be doing is looking at visas within the countries that you're considering. Because it doesn't matter what their weather is, or what their healthcare is like, or what the quality of life is like, or how much it costs to live there if you can't even get in to begin with. And once you know your options in the country, once you know the visas in the countries in the region that you're looking at, then you know your options. Then you know, like, okay, I'm choosing between this country, or this country. And then you've narrowed it down to a few options, and from there you can start digging deeper into more information about that country. So to recap, the different types of visas, generally speaking, are golden visa, or retirement visa, an investment visa where you invest in property or businesses. Some countries have a small business visa, work visa that you get through your employment, school visa, education visa that you get through your school, or a nomad visa, which would allow you to stay and work for at least some period of time. So I hope this has been helpful. This is part one. In the next part, we're going to go even deeper into what you should be looking for in the countries of your choosing to determine whether or not that's the place to go to. Other topics that I would love to cover include how to move a pet abroad, because man, oh man, have I spent hours. That was truly my number one anxiety about moving abroad. And so I know all of the options. I know every option you could have for how to move your dog abroad. So we'll talk about that. Please leave your questions in the comments, and I will also get to those as well. And happy Googling, y'all. Bye.